Welcome back to Expert Instruction, the Teach by Design podcast, where we dive deeper into the research surrounding student behavior by talking with the people implementing these practices, where they work, and with the students they support. I'm Megan Cave.
And I'm Danielle Triplett.
Everyone say hello, Danielle. Today is her first official podcast as co-host. Woohoo! And today is a good one. Today we get to talk about conferences. Joining us are three folks who know a lot about these events: Dr. Jessica Swain-Bradway, Kelly Perales, and Dr. Stephanie Martinez. All three of these women each help organize three of our favorite PBIS conferences: the Northwest PBIS Conference, the National PBIS Leadership Forum, and the Association on Positive Behavior Support Conference.
As part of our ongoing year-long series exploring the foundational features of the PBIS framework, we've come to the part about professional development. We know you use conferences as one format for professional development, and we also know lecture-style sessions require more accountability to truly embed what you learned into your teaching practices and scaling up school-wide systems. So we wanted to talk with Jessica, Kelly, and Stephanie about how we can all leverage our conference time to set us up for longer-term professional development that has a lasting impact.
The three of them came prepared with tons of tips on how to make the most of your conference season. Specifically, they really showcased how a conference is a one-stop shop for easy access to researchers, practitioners, and colleagues who have found incredible ways to make PBIS work and thrive in their contexts. When we're lucky enough to find ourselves in attendance, that's our opportunity to network, collect resources, ask questions, and truly fill our buckets so that we can take that energy back, build momentum at home, and really extend the life of our conference time.
Yes. All right. I think that's probably enough from us. Let's hear from the experts.
Okay. Well, Jessica, Stephanie, Kelly, thanks so much for joining us today on our episode.
Thank you for having us, Megan.
Yeah, thanks for organizing this.
Yeah. It's not every episode we get to have three guests, but we're so glad that you all could join us to talk to us today about conferences and how we were just talking about how educators often use conferences as a way to get professional development. And I was just thinking on, when we talk about what is high quality professional development, so much of that conversation is about how you can take the information back, and it's an ongoing thing. And conferences really are like this sort of lecture style, 1 day, 2 day, maybe 3 day event, and then you're done, right? And so we're just glad to have you guys as conference organizers yourself and conference attendees to share a little bit about how we can leverage conference events as professional development in a way that's maybe a little bit more, it's just a little deeper of an experience than maybe what people are used to. So maybe we'll just start by, what is it that you guys love about conferences? Maybe as organizers and also as people who go to conferences sometimes, like what is it about conferences that makes them so special? Stephanie, do you want to share a little bit?
Sure. Thanks, Megan. I help with the International APBS Conference, with the organization of that through the Training and Education Committee. And I think personally, what I like about attending a conference is the opportunity to expand my own knowledge, get to see people who I've read their work before, or I've seen them on a webinar before, which is kind of really cool to get that connection in place. But I also get the opportunity to see different topics that maybe I wouldn't have explored in the past, that are presented at some of these. And the other thing I like is just the breadth of some of them. You can pick different strands. So like at the International APBS Conference, I could go to a strand on home and community, and in the next section, I could go to something about tier 2. And then the next one, I could do something on classroom. But the other thing that I really like about the conferences is that there are sometimes additional workshops that some of them offer. So in addition to going to the way you talked about the sessions, is sometimes you can go to like a 3 or a 4 hour workshop, and it is an additional fee, but you get some of those skills that you can go back and take in your setting when you leave that workshop. And something we're doing new at the APBS conference next year is what we call mini skills. So that's within the conference, and those are longer sessions, but you'll get to practice a specific skill that you can go back and take to your setting.
Cool. That sounds cool. So it's not a separate workshop you're talking about. These are
No,
just
it's
longer sessions that
just
people
longer
can come
sessions.
to.
So there are
That's a
2-hour
good idea.
combined sessions. So yeah, we're really excited about offering that as something new next year.
That's a really
I
good.
also like the opportunity to try a new city.
Yes, the sightseeing of it all.
Yeah.
So our Northwest Conference pops between Tacoma and Portland, and we'll be in Spokane in a few years. And it's really nice, one, to celebrate with all of these regional educators and administrators. I think my favorite part is to celebrate with people and hear the good work going on. Because I know a lot of us are really focused on problem solving and preventing problems. And then you get in the space and you're reminded of the amazing work that goes on. And it's really uplifting.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And I appreciate the difference of the venues, getting out and meeting folks and having other restaurants.
I was going to say is, to me, conferences are bucket fillers. The people are there, they get energized. It's yes, the content and the networking and the food or the play, the location. It's all the things. And, we're coming off of our National Leadership Forum for PBIS last week. And even though our team hosts it, and so therefore you're somewhat exhausted, it's still really energizing at the same time.
I'm looking at Jessica.
I'm laughing really hard because somewhat doesn't even describe it. What I wanted to say is to add on to what Megan said, which really got me thinking, is not only do you have this kind of foundation, but one of the things I really love, and I think the forum does this really well, is you get to meet people who are taking what you know and running with it. So the imagination that's applied to implementation and research, I think that's one of the things that when you go to APBS, you get to experience, when you go to Northwest, you get to experience, is folks have the foundations really well. And there are some really fearless leaders in the field right now. And to learn and see the new perspectives is pretty astounding. It's definitely bucket filler is a great way to put it, Kelly. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I was just at the forum last week and we do a roundtable discussion on high schools. And I've been doing that with Patty and Amy for a couple of years. And it's amazing to see the growth of interest in an area too. We would maybe get 5 people in a room to want to discuss high school implementation. And I think we counted like 95 people this past time. And it was great because it was all a group discussion and it was wonderful. We had people laughing and high-fiving and sharing and dialoguing. And it was truly networking and high schools getting to talk to high school. So as Kelly, that was definitely a bucket filler for us to see that growth. So I love that opportunity.
So let's talk about what are some of your favorite conferences you've attended. I know we know about the Northwest PBIS conference, APBS, and the forum, but are there others you guys would like to highlight of some of the conferences you've attended and what makes them stand out? It could be related to PBIS, behavior, education.
I'm a big fan of Society for Prevention Research, SPR. It is PBIS, but it's not necessarily PBIS. It's not a PBIS conference, but the research that goes on, epidemiologists, prevention scientists, it is really gets my neurons firing. I love thinking about it and learning about it. And I always appreciate when I see folks in our field taking research and learnings from other areas and saying, how do we replicate that? Yeah, so it's great. And there are some amazing researchers that get kind of geeky about it. But that's one of my favorite that's not represented by people right here on this podcast right now. That's one of my favorite to attend. It's a good one.
Awesome. Love that. Stephanie, what about you? What do you love?
There's 2 that I really like. One is Council for Exceptional Children. My background is special ed, so I still like to keep in that area of special ed. I like it too because there's so many different strands and different topics within special ed. So I love it for that reason. But it's also very large, so it can sometimes be a little overwhelming. I remember going as a grad student the first time and like, what do I pick? Where do I go? How do I do this? And feeling overwhelmed. So the Council for Exceptional Children has a BD conference over in Arizona every year. And I like that one because it's smaller. And I like the more intimate sessions. You can talk to the presenters. They have social activities going on. So I kind of like both for different reasons. One's really large, you got a breadth of things, and then the other is really super focused and it's smaller and you get that more intimate setting.
Nice. Kelly?
Probably no surprise to folks here. For me, it's the National Center for School Mental Health Conference and also the Southeastern School Behavioral Health Conference, which is more regional. However, both of those promote opportunities for alignment and integration and bringing together educators and community behavioral health providers to really think about how we work efficiently and coalesce together around supporting family, school, community partnerships. And both of those events also, there are other meetings that occur. Like we know these groups of folks are coming together. And so in addition to content, it's like the community of practice idea of let's get people in a room and think about how do we keep this work going outside of these learning opportunities?
Danielle and I were just talking about such a community yesterday.
Literally in the office yesterday. Yep.
And how those kinds of sessions and groups and conversations can really be so effective as an embedded part of conference attendance. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we kind of can assume that we know when we go to these conferences, like we can take notes. We were students, we're in education, we kind of do that part. But what are the other ways we engage in conferences, right? Like, are there things you encourage attendees to do at the conferences you go to, or when you're on the other side and you're attending, things that you do to really engage and learn as much as you can while you're there?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to, maybe Jessica, you want to start with that one?
Sure. I always encourage folks to establish time to meet as a team. So first of all, go as a team, put the brains together. And then if the conference has team time embedded, great. If they don't, then figure out how to get it in there. Maybe it's lunchtime, maybe it's happy hour or dinner where you're talking. I think that is really critical. And I also like for folks to track down, like Stephanie said, track down that speaker, that person that you heard at that, session or that you read about, and say thank you. Exchange information. I think making those connections is really important. My brain is typically pretty full when I get through a conference. So I try to think about how much can I engage while I'm there, and then what do I do when I leave? So that way I can kind of keep it going. But my brain gets really happy and full at those events when I get to learn from so many great educators.
I just came back from a conference, a professional development event that I went to as a conference, and the number of sessions that I got to go to was astounding. And so they were like 45 minutes and it was 2 days. And so it was like, we were going from 8 to 5, like it was a lot. Right. And so I found myself having this like page in my notebook or on my laptop, whichever was accessible to me at the time, where I was just writing down like questions to take back to the group or what like key thing that I want to tell Robin when I come back, or check in with so-and-so about this thing, so that it was like, I don't have to remember it after I've written it down. My paper will tell me, but it gets so overwhelming. Your brain gets loaded up that and you're taking all these notes. It was nice to be able to come home and have this one page where I could go, I have 7 things that I need to talk to people about when I come home.
Make your
rest will fill in later. Yeah.
So Megan, can I build off of what you and both Jessica said?
Yeah, of course.
When we come as a team, and one of the recommendations I say, it's fun to sit with your friends and your coworkers in a session, but there's so many different ones. We divide and conquer. Mm-hmm. So we don't have everybody going to the same thing because we want to learn from each other. So the first thing is, as a team, suggest, like Jessica said, the team goes and then divide and kind of conquer. And then going back to what you just said, Megan, is when we come back from that is having a time to debrief. so that we can say, okay, I went to this session on mental health, and these are like 2 or 3 things that really stood out to me. And this is what I think we can do now as a result of it, because then it just stays with you. So that's one thing. The other big thing is, even though that they may have the PowerPoint and stuff online, if there's something I really want to remember, I'll take a picture of it. And then I'll text it. I'll text it to myself. I'll text it to like my coworker. Hey, I'm at this session. I did this at the forum. Hey, I'm at this session. There's this great infographic about tier 2. I think we could use it in this such a way. And so we had a dialogue back and forth. Sometimes I'll email. But then the third thing is, I always tell myself when I leave a conference, I want 2 things I'm going to do differently when I go back.
I like that.
So what are 2 things I can do differently when I go back to my job? And that will apply to what I'm currently doing. So those are kind of 3 things that I would recommend.
Ellie, what do you have?
I mean, I certainly think that all of the great things you have said are true, whether that's about the forum, where we, again, instruct teams to come together, divide up, bring back, create an action plan. Our team at Midwest, we practice what we teach. When we go to APBS, we do the same thing. We split up, we come back together, we debrief about our learnings, and then it's those action steps, right? That's that part about making sure that it's not just we went and learned something that week, the other month, and now we're moving on to the next thing. That we're trying to use it to inform how we operate moving forward.
We're working so hard as educators. Educators are really, we're just finishing up October. So I don't even have words for how hard it's been for some of our educators. So
that's right.
When folks can sneak away, if you have a break in a session and you can just go rest and put your feet up. A few years ago, a Northwest conference in Tacoma was during Ramadan. And so we created a prayer room. We had takeaway foods for our Muslim colleagues, just the little things to actually take care of themselves a little bit. And we try to remind people to do that. We even have wellness expectations, a la Susan Barrett, to remind people that this is a place to learn, but you're also away from being in charge of all those little humans at this moment. And so can you take that walk with a group of folks? I love it when I go to a conference and there's a yoga class or a whatever other exercises exist. I either swim or do yoga. I don't know about the other ones, but just taking time on purpose to do that. And when a conference creates that, that's even better. That's really something.
Well, especially because I think you said this, Kelly, about, the conference staff being tired at the end. And then Megan, you said your brain's just overwhelmed. I think people don't realize that sometimes being stuck in a conference center or a convention center and these windowless rooms for 2 or 3 days and hearing all this stuff and not used to being sitting for such a long period of time, it can get to you. So I say, give yourself some grace. Like my big thing is just to go walk outside, find a terrace somewhere, go outside and get some fresh air, walk around, take that break if you need it. Because it is a lot thrown at you in such a short time. I think you said there are 45-minute sessions from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. It's okay to skip one if you need that break for yourself.
It's such a good point. I was saying, there are times where unless you do it on purpose, you might not step outside of the building
at all.
Yes. Because,
like for days.
Right. Because what do? Oh, after the sessions, then come to the posters or come to this networking session, or and all of a sudden it's like, does anyone know what the weather's like this week? So you're right, Stephanie. We all have to kind of think to ourselves, what do I need to do for my own wellness? And when conferences can build in that space and time, it really does help remind us of those things.
I agree.
That reminds me too, Megan, as we were getting ready for this, we talked about like, what do we do? How do we navigate conferences? And I had, years ago as a sort of a newer educator, I had this impression, like I go to a conference, they're paying for it, so I need to go to every session. And it's like, it's actually okay if there's one that's not really calling my name or whatever during that, session number 3, to skip it, to use that time to do something else, whether that's to take a walk and get fresh air or connect with a colleague or whatever. Like,
Take a nap.
Permission. You don't have, just because everything's offered, you don't have to do it for 8
That's
to 5.
right.
And I know as a presenter, I will see people who excuse themselves midway through the session, and that is also okay. It is okay to be there and to, we're adults, and to say, if this isn't working for me, if I'm not getting the information I need, that I can gracefully exit. And, I think it's important to remind people or to tell them
gracefully exit. I'm just having this vision of you standing up and being like, bye, running out the door.
Knocking people over as she runs.
Not my style. Nope.
Gracefully.
And that's what, and Danielle, I was going to say that too. And I'm glad you brought that up because, people think, well, I'm going to offend the presenter.
Yes.
And you don't. People are used to it. They realize maybe it's the content. Maybe they got a phone call from their child's school they got to go take real quick. And it's okay. I mean, there's plenty of times where I've gone into a session and I was like, oh, in my head, when I read the description, I thought they were talking about this. Or I thought it was more of a practitioner session. And then I realized it was a research study. Well, I'm not really a researcher at the time. It's okay to go find something that is going to be better to meet your needs. And I was talking to people about that last year at the APBS conference before it started at the registration. And they were saying, well, what if I don't like a session? I said, it's okay. You can go find a different one. And they're like, really? That's allowed? I was like, yeah, that's allowed. You can do it. And they were like, I'm not going to offend anybody. And I said, no, it's okay. So just letting people know that it's okay.
It is. It is. So I guess one of the biggest things there are two things that we really wanted to make sure to talk about today, also related to this. One is that the reason that we're talking about professional development at all this month is because we've been going through the items within the framework, the key components of the PBIS framework, and what does it mean to be implementing PBIS? And it turns out that there is a component related to professional development. And so because it's part of the framework and equity is always built into everything that we do, I wanted to check in with you guys to see how it is that equity plays itself out in this professional development space. What are the ways that you see when you think about equity and professional development and the events that you run or the events that you attend and how it fits within the framework? How do those two things go together?
That's a great question, Megan. And I'm glad that folks can't see me putting chat and amusing myself in the chat pod as we talk. One of the things that we do as a group that organizes is that we're working really, really hard to boost representation for our BIPOC educators in particular. We have board membership goals. I have a board of directors, as well as participant goals to more closely reflect the demographics of the students that we serve in our region. And so one of the things that we've done very concretely is we offer travel scholarships for speakers of color. For when you submit a proposal for a breakout session, your thank you is a free registration, but we take it further. For speakers that submit, that get accepted, if they identify from the BIPOC community, we cover their hotel cost. We're putting our money where our mouth is, that we want to support representation and education. So that's a big one for us. We also work really hard on accessibility. Is the internet powerful enough to actually have closed captioning running while people present? What is the accessibility in terms of how far away is the parking garage? And do they have ways to support people that need different mobility supports? So we really kind of come at before we even get to the content, we come at the experience from how do we as an organizer support folks to access and learn from the conference. And one of those I gave examples earlier was we had the conference during Ramadan. It was really easy to change our schedule. So there was not a session during prayer times. They're not that long. It was very easy to find halal meals that would be prepared and delivered in ways that need to for our Muslim colleagues. Those things were very easy and they were not very expensive. And it was just one of those things that we felt like, especially being in Tacoma with a large Muslim population, it was a small thing that we could do. to say we are actually committed to the educators in this region. And we hope that we can be accommodating and not more than accommodating, comfortable, that you feel like you can show up and be part of this community. So that's how we approach it from an organizational perspective, just on how we actually run the conference.
That's really just exceptional to hear, Jessica. I feel like you could give a tutorial to other groups.
Thank you,
in
Kelly.
thinking about things
I'll pay
like
you
that.
later.
For the center with the forum, as we're putting together the content, first of all, we're thinking about, do we have representation in our topics that addresses not only various diverse populations, vulnerable populations, but also are we thinking about urban school districts and rural school districts? Stephanie, you mentioned high school, elementary, special ed and regular ed. Are we talking to our coaches as well as to our classroom teachers? What about family voice and student voice? We've kind of got all of that in our mind as we're mapping out the various sessions to be sure that we're kind of hitting all the marks in terms of equity in our messages. And then from a planning perspective, especially, being funded out of the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs, are we being sure that we're meeting the needs of our participants, similar to what Jessica was saying? I don't think everyone on here was with us last week. We had our day 2 keynote featured 2 youth, one of whom his grandfather was with him and only spoke Spanish. We made sure that one of the screens, the closed captioning was in Spanish, so that he could follow along with what everybody was saying that day. And by the way, that was recorded. If you get a chance to watch it, it was, of course, I'm getting like chills right now. It was awesome. I wish we would have had more time for them to talk. But nevertheless, I think, Megan, your point about how do we center equity in the work we do around professional development is well taken. And you have to be very intentional about it in planning for conferences.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Kelly, that was an amazing session with Diego and Brendan. And then we actually were able to get Diego to do a second presentation with us. We didn't record that one, but if you do get a chance, people here, to go watch it, it was amazing. But one of the things that's a little bit different about the International APBS conference is it's not just about education. It's about the lifespan. So from little bitties all the way to grown adults, and not just schools, but communities and agencies, but also early childhood. So one of the things that we do is, because the organization is focused on all those, is making sure that there is sessions across all those different areas, and equality in number of sessions. So trying to make sure that there are kind of equal numbers across the different domains.
Right.
But because it's international, we do have international board members, and we get feedback on them on how to include our international attendees. So one of the things we're working on different for this year based on their feedback is some guidelines for presenters above and beyond just accessibility, but also how to include our international people. So things like when you're talking and you're doing your presentation, if you are talking about and you say middle school, you might need to explain middle school is typically grades 6 to 8 students about the ages of 12 to 14, because some of our international countries don't have middle school. It's just secondary or college is what they call it. So coming up with some guidelines just to make sure that we are inclusive of that. And then another kind of structural type thing that we've been talking about is just making sure that because we do rotate between cities, that it's easy for people to get into. And when we're talking about cost, it's easier to fly into a big city that has a big international airport than somewhere where you're going to have to fly to a big city and then take like a regional airplane to a smaller city. So really considering that for future planning to make sure that we have the ability for the international people to easily get to the conference.
Love that.
When you think about, we're coming to the end of our conversation, and something that we like to end with with all of our guests is sort of the now what. So at this point, let's say that people listening to this have some kind of conference or a conference style event that's in their professional development calendar this year. What would you say? What is like a recommendation or two that you would have for them on how they can turn an event like that, where it's a lecture style or a one and done kind of activity, into something that's that can live outside of that that one attendance, something that they can take back with them to their school and kind of get people energized and implementing some of these practices? What would you say? What would you recommend people do? Stephanie, do you want to start? You got a recommendation for us?
Sure. I kind of have two. So I know some school districts require teachers to do a professional development plan every year. So if you make that part of your professional development plan and you outline as a result of going to Northwest or the forum, this is what I'm going to do, then it kind of does hold you a little bit accountable for it. But then the other thing I say is, if we're talking about PBIS here, taking those things back to your PBIS team, whether it's a district team, a state team, or a school team, and say, okay, based on these conferences, what I went to, what Jessica went to, Danielle went to, these are the 3 things we're going to implement as a result of the conference, and make yourself accountable for it. And I think those are the things that I would do post conference to make sure that I really do what I said I was going to do.
Yeah,
that accountability can really be helpful in that. I love that, Stephanie.
Kelly, did you have more to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to something we were talking about a little bit earlier, that piece about having an action plan and making, your experience team-based. And, to me, it's also taking advantage of all of the resources and tools that are available. If you go to pbis.org, you can find, I tell people this, all the way from like a 4-minute video, all the way up to entire volumes of electronic books. And it's all free and publicly available. And, when people come to conferences, I think it's human nature, especially as, Jessica's been pointing out, it's so stressful right now to be a teacher or an educational leader. And people just want to say, tell me what to do. Tell me what to use.
I feel that.
And we're trying to say, oh, but here's this process. And so, that can feel overwhelming too, when you go back and guess what? Your work waited for you, right? I mean, maybe you had a substitute or something, but mostly your inbox was filling up and all the things. So it's like, what are the few simple resources or tools that you can take from the session, from whatever they pointed you to with technology now, right? Follow this link, go to this thing. And that's where teams can really take advantage of all that we have to offer in terms of chunking it out further for themselves in a meaningful way that, fits in their parameters and time frame.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Kelly. I love the idea of looking at your action plan, going to certain sessions based on that. I also appreciate it personally when I go to a conference and there's a workshop available. So you have some type of skill building session that you can go to that's not the 45 or 75 minute, hey, look what we did, right? The breakout sessions are great for, hey, here's this tool and this is how it works, or here's this cool guidebook, or one of the resources, for example, that you talked about, Kelly. Here, you can use this. This is how we did it. Those skill building workshops, either the day before or the day after, some conferences actually have longer sessions embedded throughout, gives you an opportunity to really get a little bit deeper. Because even though I host a conference, I tell people conferences are not professional development. A workshop day can be a skill builder, but a conference, we're going to celebrate, you're going to see examples, and then you really need to take that back into the scope of the entire year in order for that to have an impact beyond, oh, it was a warm and fuzzy and I got to hug Stephanie and I haven't seen her for a while. It's totally worth it. I love it. I'll take a hug. And if I expect that to have resonating impact, then there has to be a way to incorporate it back into a current action plan, a scope of PD, your personal PD plan, those things that have been mentioned.
Jessica, I love what you said. And it really reminds me that sometimes in my experience going to conferences, it not only do I learn new things, do I get my bucket filled, but it can also sometimes remind me or affirm some of the things we're doing and say, wow, I'm thinking of welcoming students at the door. This is not a brand new practice. Educators have been having the opportunity to do that for decades, centuries even. But sometimes you go to a conference and you see the research behind it and you're like, that's right. I need to do that every day. I do it occasionally, but what if we all did it every day, including the administrators, including the librarian, the counselor? Like, so sometimes for me, it's also like reminding us to say, wow, how can we strengthen what we're currently doing and increase the fidelity of that?
Well, I appreciate you all joining us today, sharing your knowledge, your experience as conference organizers and attendees and educators. All of this information is super helpful, and I think it helps to expand what that core component within the PBIS framework actually means in practice. So hopefully everyone listening today will be able to take back some little nugget of something from our conversation today as they go out into their conference event this year. So thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate you all.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank
you,
you.
Danielle.
Thank
Good
you,
to see
Megan.
you,
Thank you,
Stephanie and
Danielle.
Kelly.
Yeah. Good to be with you today.
Conversation.